met her in 2010, after I just been sober for a few months, and I was hell on wheels. And we did not interact, I don't believe. Maybe said hello to each other. But I watched her, and I was scared to death of her. She's a very real person. And now I just want to be her when I grow up. So with that, I'll give you a beat.
No, thanks. If I sit in that chair, I'm going to have to act like Edith Ann, and if you remember that, you're even older than I am. My name is Kate, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hey.
My sobriety date is July 19th, 1986. My home group is the Fort Bragg group in Fayetteville, and also the Freedom and Growth group in Fayetteville, because I have two home groups because I'm a rebel. I can't help it. I'm here to tell you what it was like and what happened and what it's like now. And the first thing that I want to say is that I have been sober longer than I was alive when I got here. I've been in Alcoholics Anonymous more than half of my life, most of my adult life. And I'm still here. I still keep coming back. This is where it's at. I had my first drink, just in a general way. I was very self-conscious when I was a child. I was a big crybaby, and I felt different. You know, I felt weird right from the start. And when I was 11, I have a lot of alcoholism in my family, and I was at my cousin's house, and my uncle evidently decided that he didn't want to drink alone, so he had the gin, and the older children, the 11 and 13-year-old, had the vermouth. So my first drink was a wine glass full of vermouth, and with dinner, and then, you know, they had this big house, and cleaning the house was a big deal, so, you know, we had to clean the whole kitchen afterwards, and everybody went to their different parts of the house. And I went down to the kitchen, and I got a water glass, and I filled it with vermouth. And I stood in the kitchen, and I drank it down. So my social drinking lasted like 15 minutes. I always drank to get drunk. I was 11. There are not a lot of good opportunities for 11-year-olds to get hammered. So it took me some work to get drunk a few times more until I was 13. And when I was 13, I made the very conscious, mature decision that I was in trouble with alcohol, and I really ought to just use drugs instead. You know, as you do when you're in the 8th grade. And in my defense, it was the 70s, and pot smoking was what teenagers did, and alcohol was what terrible, awful grown-ups did. Ooh, bad. So I set off to accomplish that. But the truth is that I did everything that I could every time I could. My drug of choice was yours. My preferred method of usage was whatever made it work fastest. I got right into drug culture. You know, you want me to hold it this way and keep my lighter this high, and you bet. You know, these drinks go together, those drinks don't get, you got it, whatever you want. So I was all in. As soon as I found out what it felt like, that first time I drank, I felt comfortable in my skin. I was witty, and I was pretty, and I did not care what you thought. And I chased that for a long time. When I was 13, my whole family assumed that I would go to an Ivy League school on a 4-year scholarship. By the time I was 15, they didn't know whether or not I would graduate from high school because I had other things to do than go to school. School came easy for me, but I just couldn't be bothered to go. So, I mean, when I say I was all in, the minute I got my hands on the mood-altering whatevers, I went for it. I did make it through high school. I'm sorry to tell you that I'm part of the generation that made it impossible to skip school. My apologies, because I was good at it. I continued to drink, even though I was sort of in denial about drinking. I did continue to drink, and I smoked non-habit forming marijuana every day for 7 years. You can say it's non-habit forming, but if you give me something, I will make a habit of it. And so I did, and I finally got to a place where I was miserable all the time. I couldn't carry on a conversation because I couldn't keep track of what I was saying from the beginning of the sentence to the end. And I knew some people who were getting sober. Not immediately around me. None of my friends ever got sober. I was the only one who ever got sober, but I knew of other people. And so I thought to myself, well, this is it. I'm going to quit drinking and quit using drugs, and that's it. And I made it exactly 30 days. No, 31, because it was August. I did not attempt to attend any meetings. I did not attempt to do anything different. I was still going to the bar. I was still hanging out with the people who were smoking pot. And one day somebody passed me something, and I took it. And it was just like that. There was no fight, there was no consideration, there was, yes. So, went back to drinking and using with a will, and but I really had to, I guess I was about 21 or 22, and so I made an equally mature decision that really what I needed was just to drink, because, I mean, you can get in trouble when you're drinking, but it's not like you'll be arrested because you have a drink in your hand. So I went that way, and I found something that I could drink. My mother is an Al-Anon, and she has half a glass of wine and goes face down on her plate. It's the funniest thing you ever saw in your life. And so, it took me a lot of work and effort to get up to where I could drink more. So I set to it, because when there's something for me to do, I get on it. And I did get to where I could drink 6 doubles in a night, which is not a record, but it's not bad for a girl my size. 12 ounces of vodka, not bad. But that was basically my starting point. That's what I was headed for. When I was almost 23, I met a guy in the bar that I used to hang out in, my home bar, it's just like across the street from where I lived, who was in AA. And I said to him, "What are you doing here?" I submit to you that he probably did not have good intentions, but, looking for that ambiance, which is French for drunk women. But he said, he said that he was in AA, he was drinking orange juice and blah, blah, blah. And so we became friends, and he used to come, and I have no idea how this guy stayed sober. He would come at closing time and pick me up and take me out to dinner, breakfast. Breakfast. And I'd be knee-walking drunk. I mean, just like, whoa, barely stand it. And we would go out. Who knows what was going on in that man's mind. But after a while of this, I said to him, "Do you think I'm an alcoholic?" And he told me a lie. He said, "In AA, we don't tell people they're alcoholics." Now, y'all know that's not true. We do with a will. But the truth is that, that it is self-diagnosed. He said, "Why don't you try going to some meetings and see what you think? Try not drinking and go to some meetings and see what you think." And now, I grew up in Syracuse, New York, as you can tell from my lovely dulcet tone. And at that time, I think they had maybe 25 meetings a week. And they had 4 NA meetings a week in Syracuse. This was in 1985. So I went to 3 AA meetings and 1 NA meeting. And I listened to people talk about punching cops and getting DWIs and all kinds of stuff. And I said, nope, 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 nope. I never punch cops. They carry guns. Get punching amps carrying a gun. And can't get a DWI when you start drinking when you're 11. There is no car buying in your life, you know. So there were all these reasons why not. And I went back to what I was doing. But here's what happens, and it says this in the book. After every spree, I would say to myself, son of a bitch. God damn it. And things got worse in a really dramatic fashion. And years ago, somebody said this in a meeting, and it's absolutely true for me. I didn't have a lot of not yets. It was the agains that got me. Oh my God, I've done that again. They're looking at me like that again. I am waking up not in my house again. That sort of thing. Even when I am crazy, I'm not completely stupid. So I moved out of Syracuse and I moved to Washington, D.C., where my Aunt Jane was inviting me to come down. She would send me the help wanted ads. Up in Syracuse, the help wanted ad section of the Sunday Washington Post was bigger than the entire Sunday Syracuse paper. So I figured I had a pretty good chance of getting a job down there. And I got there at the end of May. It took me almost a month to find a job. I got a job in a bar. And I hit bottom within 6 weeks. I did not drink while I was looking for that job. Once I got the job, I started drinking again, and the last week was like a month. It just went on and on. In Washington, D.C., I don't know if you've been there, but if you live in one section of town, you definitely don't want to go to another section of town. So I was living in Southwest D.C., not too far from the mall, and I would take a cab home at night, and they would take me to Southeast D.C., which is not a place that you want to go at 2 o'clock in the morning. People who live there don't want to go there. And, I'd get a ride home with some guy and he would take me to his house instead of mine. I mean, just this kind of thing went on and on. And, I was not ever injured or assaulted, mostly because I'm me. And my mother taught me I belong to myself. And that message comes across in my personality. So I didn't get into too much trouble, but just stuff was happening. It was ugly. The last time I drank, I had been drinking vodka and grapefruit juice for 2 years at this point, and I had to stop drinking it because it tasted and smelled like barf, not to put too fine a point on it. So I switched to vodka and tonic because that grapefruit juice is very hard on your system. You shouldn't drink it. So I had a couple of drinks this last night at the bar, and I got to the end of my shift and I had a drink, and I had another drink, and I was already slurring my words. I thought that was odd. But I went over across the alley and had another one, and I was trying to talk to somebody. I was having a great deal of difficulty getting the words in a way that I could be understood, because I'd only had 3 drinks, but I was probably still drunk from the night before. My liver just wasn't able to keep up with me. Anyway, I made it home, straight home. I remember being careful about taking my shoes off where I could find them the next day, because I was always losing them. And again, still no car. And I had gotten contact lenses that last year of my drinking. I went through like 7 pairs of contact lenses because I would take them out, they wouldn't get into them. It was a deal. So I was very careful to take my eyesight out and put it in its little case. And I woke up in the morning and my Aunt Jane that I was living with said to me, "You probably need a cup of coffee." I was like, all right, what the hell's going on here? And she told me that I had woken up in the middle of the night and thrown up in the bedroom that we shared and gone back to bed. And I thought this was kind of low. She told me that I smelled like her ex-husband. That's just rude. But when she told me all this, and I wasn't defensive, it was like, I just felt like, man, it's over. It's just over. I can't hide it anymore. And I said to her, well, I guess it's time for me to go back to AA. And she said, I guess so. And that was July 19th, 1986. I was 23, almost 24. I had been drinking for 12 years. And I couldn't do it anymore. I went back to AA because I knew that you guys knew how to stay sober. I didn't want to get a sponsor. I didn't want to talk to women. I didn't have any use for women. I did not believe in God. I didn't not believe in God. God was not any kind of part of my life in any way, shape, or form, except for as an esoteric argument. And I didn't know anything about not drinking. But I knew that you guys knew how not to drink. So I went to my first meeting that Monday. That was a Saturday morning. I went to my first meeting on Monday. And I've been coming to AA ever since. When I first came to AA in Washington, D.C., there were about 200 meetings a day in the Washington area. Now, it is a very large geographic area. We're talking about from maybe here to almost here to Wilmington. I mean, it is a large geographical area, but there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people living there. So it's, there's a lot of AA. And I was living in town, so I was going to meetings nearby, and people were afraid of me. People are still kind of afraid of me. I don't know why. I'm perfectly nice, but apparently I come across as being sort of opinionated, just a little bit. Anyway, and when I was new, of course, I was radiating anger and crazy. So I would walk into a meeting and, I'd walk up to people and they would turn their backs on me. And I was like, what the hell's going on here? Even brand new, I knew that you weren't supposed to do that to new people, but there were a couple of times when I was new that I was out, going to or from meetings, and I felt like, man, I should get drunk, but I really didn't have enough money to do the job, so I hell with it. Well, when I was about a month sober, I discovered AA dances. At that time, there were a lot of clubhouses, and as you know, clubhouses have trouble paying the rent a lot of times, and so they would have dances every other weekend. And this one had them every other weekend, and that one had them on the off weekends, and I was going to dances every weekend because I love to dance. So I started going to AA dances. I stopped working in the bar. I got a job running a machine, a printing press. And that was perfect for me. I had no business being around people. The machine was good. I could yell at it and kick it and stuff. And I came along slowly. When I was about 2 months sober, I met a guy at a dance, of course, and it started going around with him. And he took me to a meeting that was in the Church of the Pilgrims on P Street, and it was enormous. You have to go down the stairs to get to this fellowship hall, and it is like a cavern. There's like 400 people at this meeting. And I walk in, and I look down, and I see the 400 chairs on the floor, and I start backing up. Just pulled me back in. But what I saw there was a guy, the regular secretary of that meeting. In D.C., they have, the meeting starts at 8 or 8:30, and it goes half an hour, and then they have halftime, pass the basket, chips, announcements, and then they have the second half of the meeting, and everybody says the Lord's Prayer, and they go. So the regular secretary at this meeting was celebrating his anniversary that night, so they had a different guy substituting. And this guy, his name is Bryce M., and he is still sober. He lives in Hawaii, I think, now. He was the kind of guy that if I had seen him when I was out drinking, I would have left the building. He was one of those big, burly blonde guys that is like radiating crazy. And you just think to yourself, bad shit is gonna happen around this guy, for real. We have to go. But he was giving out the chips. And it wasn't time for me to get a chip. Damn it. I was like 2.5 months sober. So, but he was so excited and he generated so much excitement giving out the chips. I was like, I'm coming back here when I need to get my 3-month chip. And I went back there and he wasn't the secretary. But I saw him and I went up to him and I said, you. And I told him what I just said. And he said, well, I'm not really the secretary here, but if you want to go to a meeting tomorrow night, here's my phone number, give me a call. I didn't go to a meeting with him on Monday night, but on Tuesday night we went to the Kensington Young People Group. And I found young people in AA. I was, 3 months sober, so I was just about turning 24. I was crazy as I could be. I didn't have a sponsor, didn't have a home group, didn't have a clue, but I liked to dance and I was willing to go to meetings. And so I started hanging out with these young people, and they didn't say, you gotta go to 90 meetings in 90 days. They said, there's a really good meeting tomorrow night, you wanna go? We went out to Bob's Big Boy that's how long ago it was, there was still Bob's Big Boy. After the meeting and tortured the waitresses until 2 o'clock in the morning. We did all kinds of stuff. We went everywhere, did everything. And I started going to meetings with these people. And I mean, when I say I fell in with a fast crowd, these people went to meetings every night. They had sponsors, they were sponsors, they read the traditions, they read all the literature, they were on it. And it was just like when I learned how to smoke pot. It was like, I'm in, let's go. And I did everything that they told me to do. They nagged me until I got a sponsor. 5 months I asked somebody to be my sponsor. She was younger than me and only just a little less than a year longer than me in sobriety, and she was beautiful. She had long hair and she wore a leather jacket and jeans with knee-high boots, and I was like, I want what she has. So that was what I did. And she would see me in the meeting. She'd say, hey, it's great to see you again, which, people were not saying that to me. So I started hanging out with these guys. And she made me get a service job pretty much at gunpoint. Now, I did not want a service job. I didn't know what a service job was, but I was pretty sure I didn't want it. She made me be the secretary at this Kensington Young People Group. And so at halftime, I had to stand up and make announcements and give out chips. And I would rather have stood in front of a firing squad, really. But you know what? They pried that job out of my hands 18 months later. They pried it out of my hands. I had the chips in a little, the little fish and tackle box that a craft box that we always keep them in. And I had them, and we couldn't leave them at the meeting. So next week, I had to go to the meeting because I had the chips. They sucked me in, you guys. My first real home group was the Brookland group in Northeast DC. It's not too far from, man, that's what happens when you get old. It's not a bad neighborhood. We'll just put it that way. But I had to take the train up there and then walk over. And I kept going, I'd go there sometimes and there'd be 2 women there. And I'd see the other woman, I'd be like, girl, I'm glad you're here, because I was almost outnumbered. That was my home group. And those people really taught me a lot about staying sober. When I was almost 3 years sober, I was in college because my Aunt Jane told me I was going, and there's no arguing with Aunt Jane. So I went, and I got this volunteer position, and I went out to southern Idaho for the summer. I was a volunteer for the Bureau of Land Management, and where I went in Idaho, there were 10 meetings a week, one each day plus 3 nooners. That was between the little town that I was in and the one 10 miles down the highway, Rupert. That's where they grow the potatoes for your Burger King French fries. So I'm in this little town. I get there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. Thursday night I'm in a meeting. Sunday I have a temporary sponsor because that's what I do. That's where I'm at. That's, you know, I went out there. I didn't have, that was in 1989. So I read the book through cover to cover several times. I read the 12 and 12 cover to cover several times. I went to lots of meetings. There was another volunteer there. She met one person that summer. I knew everybody in town walking down the street. Hey, Marv, I know this guy. Oh, that guy's on the radio. I know that guy. I knew everybody. They did it differently there, but they did it, you know. I graduated from college. I did not do anything with my degree. I ended up getting a job in a little store and then for the franchise. And I just kept going to meetings, staying sober. In 1998, I moved to Durham. My folks had moved there a few years before, and I moved down to be near them, and to get away from the guy that I was dating currently, that I of course brought down with me right afterwards. And it's a sordid story. Let me tell you, just because somebody's been sober 10 years doesn't mean they're sane, in case you were wondering. That also applies to 20 and 30, just in case you didn't know. In case you hadn't seen that in person, here I am. But I moved to Durham, and I realized when I got to Durham that people there had this real big problem about talking about drugs at meetings. I mean, like, they were ugly about it. Like, Whiskey Tango Foxtrot, what's going on here, you know? And it took me years to get used to it and to start to come to accept it. I will say this, I am 56 years old. I graduated from high school in 1980, before any of you guys were born. And I can tell you, I defy you to find me a person my age or younger that hasn't used drugs. I defy you. This whole thing about, you know, we don't want you to talk about that because we disapprove of how you got here, it's a prejudice that needs to go away. However, what I finally came to was, you know, it's, if everybody else is okay and I'm not okay, then the problem is me. And so I need to change myself and my attitude. And so I don't go into a big drug-a-log. I don't, I try to respect that about people, but I do want you to know that, you know, that all these folks that, you know, that are coming in and going back out, make sure you don't chase them out, you know. Alcoholics Anonymous is not for drugs, but it's also not for shouting at people who have a different experience than me, you know. We want to be inclusive, not exclusive. So that's my little speech. I have to make it. After I'd been sober about 25 years, I finally was calm enough that I could do service above the group level. So, because I was very impatient with that stuff. So I started at the intergroup, which in Fayetteville is actually a central office. We had an intergroup, that's gone, now we have a central office. And I was the treasurer for 2 years, and then I was the alternate DCM for the district, and I am now the outgoing DCM for our district, District 51, and the incoming chair of the central office. The service work that I do does wonders for me. it absolutely does wonders for me. And I am not doing it for my own gratification. I'm doing it, it's only one reason to have an intergroup or a central office, and that is to make Alcoholics Anonymous available to people who need it, whether they're sober or not. That's the only reason to have one. And that's my mission, is to make sure that anybody who comes to AA in Fayetteville, Lumberton, you know, Whiteville, any of those places, that they can find Alcoholics Anonymous. When they call, we're there. I still sponsor people. I still have a sponsor. I wouldn't give either of those things up. I have used the services of professionals. I've had gone to therapists at different times for different reasons. I'm going to one now, and she said to me, don't you find that, you know, you sponsor all these people, don't you find that draining? I said, absolutely the opposite. Absolutely the opposite. When I am doing service work, when I am talking to the people that I sponsor, when I am speaking from the podium, I am forgetting about myself, which is really all that we were ever after, you know. When we were getting messed up, we were just trying to get away. Well, let me rephrase that. When I was getting messed up, I was just trying to get away, and this is where it's at. I did mention that I didn't believe in God, or, you know, I wasn't an agnostic or an atheist. I was that doesn't apply to me. I really was. And I was fortunate, because where I got sober, they didn't say, you know, you gotta get on your knees, because that would have gotten a very rude reply. God put me right where I needed to be. My sponsor told me when I was 6 or 7 months sober, she said, you're gonna have to look at the second step. I was like, oh, come on, there's no power greater than Kate. Really, come on. I mean, I am a bulldozer, buddy. And she said, yeah, read it. I don't. So, at that time, Sandy B was still speaking at Sibley Hospital every Saturday. And Sandy was a circuit speaker that died a couple of years ago, and he would go, you know, he would talk about 3 steps every week. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then he would talk about the traditions for a couple of weeks, and he'd talk about the history, and then we'd go back. So, you know, it was never the same thing every month. But he just happened to be talking about the second step, which, you know, I don't know if you've been around for a while, but that happens all the time. Like your sponsor says, you need to think about the 7th step, and you go to 4 meetings in a row on the 7th step. It's very irritating. It's really hard to maintain your air of egocentricity when you're being, you know, shown the way like that. Anyway, Sandy was talking about the 2nd step, and he said, you know, and the 1st step says we admitted we were powerless over drugs and alcohol. And what that means is I'm going to die drunk or locked up. Or both. Apparently you can get drunk in lockup. So happily I've never been there, but well, you know, the pigeon says, well, you've got me over a barrel. Now what do I do? So, well, you have to believe in a power that's bigger than you and bigger than alcohol. He said, well, I don't believe. He said, well, change your mind. Change my mind? I never changed my mind. Yeah. And then that was a Saturday, and the following Friday I was at Shepherd Street, which was a young people's meeting. And I'm in this meeting, and the old guy was 42, and the youngest of us was 14. No, I think he turned 15 in August. So, yeah, he was 15. He used to ride a skateboard to meetings. And the old guy said, you know, you don't have to take it on faith that there's a power greater than ourselves, because it is Friday night and we are all in this room and none of us are drinking. And that's not our choice. We didn't do anything to make that happen. There's a power greater than ourselves at work. And I thought about it, and I was like 6 or 7 months sober, and I thought, you know, I haven't been sober this long since I was in the 5th grade. Something's working here, and it's not Kate. And I started to open my mind up a tiny little bit. When I went out to Idaho, when I was 3 years sober, you know, I mean, I gave it lip service, but I wasn't really gonna try everything. I figured I was smart and I could get by on the Cliff Notes version. No, not the way it works. So when I went out to Idaho, suddenly I was out there. I didn't have any of my service jobs. I didn't have any of the people that I sponsored. My sponsor was on the other side of the country. I was out here in this tiny little town all by myself. Well, I'm in AA, but I know how to sound good and feel bad. And here I am. And so I thought, as a desperate experiment, just grasping at straws, I thought, well, okay, I'll try praying. And I got my book out, because it has prayers in it, because I don't know any. And I went in the bathroom and closed the door, because God forbid anybody should see me praying. And I tried it. And I tried it more than once. And I discovered that when I do that, I have a better day than when I don't. Who would have guessed? So I started to do that. And when I got back to the DC area and I was talking to the old guy, and he, I said, I just feel like I'm being carried along, like I'm not in danger. And he said, that's what faith is. It's like, oh, I had no idea. Okay, well, I guess I have faith. I have gone back and forth with this. I don't really have trouble with God. I have a lot of trouble with religion. And I have a lot of opinions, none of which pertain to this. I do, from time to time, as it says in the book, get seized with a rebellion so strong that I can't pray. But I try to be kind to myself and just keep at it and just keep trying. When I was, I got married in 2003. I never thought I would, but who knows what awaits. And my mother and father-in-law lived in this tiny little town in southeast Arizona. And after a few years, it became apparent that something was very wrong with my mother-in-law. And I had to go out and help them get packed up and move them to North Carolina. So this was in 2007, and I have spent the last, all of 2007 and part of 2006 going, well, it just seems wildly improbable to me. I'm just mealy-mouthing my way out of a relationship with God. I get out to Arizona, and there is a crazy woman in this building, and I'm not the only one. And she and her husband are arguing in front of me, and they start, and I'm getting worse and worse. I'm getting so nervous. She starts yelling at him, and I look up at the ceiling tiles and I say, God, I need your help right now. I can't wait. And I did that the whole time I was out there. I was just praying. God, get me through this. God, get us all through this. We did get through it. We got it back to North Carolina, and we, found an assisted living facility and la-di-da, and I was the kind of daughter-in-law that everybody would hope for. I took care of them. I made things happen. I was thoughtful and I was kind, even while I was sort of planning my demise on the way back from the old folks' home, so I didn't ever have to live in an old folks' home. But I took care of business. And the reason I was able to do that is because of this fellowship, because of, having some time in the program and knowing some things about myself and about God and asking for help. And she was pretty mad at me at first, but after a while, she would say to me, thank you for taking such good care of me. And that was a miracle. That was an absolute miracle. And I could not have done it if I hadn't been sober. I am, like most of us, profoundly self-centered. In the way they used to call people profoundly retarded, I am profoundly self-centered. And I am able now, with the help of the program, all 12 of the steps, and the intensive work from my poor beleaguered sponsors, I am able to not go for what I want every single time. I'm able to be there for other people. I'm able to be kind to people. It's up and down, I have I have my moments. I'm not always a good example to other people. I try. And, you know, I love this program. I love Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was pretty new in the program, I didn't get my sponsor till I was about 5 months sober. So I was maybe 9 months sober when my sponsor told me that I needed to do my 4th step. And I said, oh no. No. I mean, I didn't say that to her. I said, sure. And then I didn't do anything, for months. Because I didn't want to, you know. I finally kind of did a half-assed list of what I thought my character defects might be, and I went and announced those to her, and she said, okay, you know, now read 6 and 7 until further notice. And when I finally went to do my 8th step, I wrote down all these names, and she didn't know any of them because I hadn't told her my real 4th step. So that was how I did my 4th step, is when I did my 8th step. I don't recommend doing this way, by the way. But even when I try to slide out of something, I get to go, you know, do the right thing eventually. I went to do my 9th step with my old drinking buddies, and I had 3 friends that I had I'd been all through high school and after high school, and they were up in Syracuse, and I drove up there, and I went to see them. There were 3 of them. My best friend Tracy, her brother, and my ex-boyfriend, who was his best friend, so that, you know, the 4 of us were like, you know, tied together in knots. And I said the same thing to each one of them, and I got 3 different responses. The first one was, about goddamn time. The second was no, it was all me. And the third one was, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, okay. And I went home, happy as could be. I can go to my hometown. I don't care who I see, where I go, doesn't matter at all. I am 100% free. I don't have anybody to apologize to. I don't have anybody to hide from. When they say we have a new freedom and a new happiness, that's what they're talking about. You do that 9th step, and I didn't do the 9th step for them to love me again. I did the 9th step so that I can go anywhere and do anything. And I don't have to worry about who I run into. I know they say to do the steps in order. My sponsor told me to do the steps in order, but in my case, I was told to do the 10th step right from the beginning, because the 10th step says, what does it say? I used to know these things by heart. Continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it. She could see where I was wrong, and I could not. So she had me reading the 10th step right from the beginning. In the 12 and 12, it says, every time we are disturbed, no matter what the cause, we are in the wrong. Period. And for a long time, I thought that meant that I was wrong. And that's not necessarily the case, but what's wrong is that I'm disturbed, and I can't afford to be that way. I need to get out of the jackpot. So how do I do that? It says in the 4th step, it talks about this, and it also talks about this in the 10th step. If I'm wrong, fess up. Get it out of the way. You know, clean that slate. If the other person is wrong, forgive them. Really? I don't want to. She said, you know, you're mad, and you're at home, and you're mad, and the person that you're mad at is at home, and he's watching the game. He's got his feet up, you know. And I said, well, that's not fair. I said, you've done that to yourself. Forgive them and move on. You know, and it says, finally, we begin to see that all people are flawed, mentally ill, most of us, and frequently wrong, you know. And so my job, somebody that I've sponsored told me this, my job is to be kind to other people. Kind? You didn't grow up in my family, man. We would have eaten you alive. But it's true. My job is to be kind. And so this is, you know, I came in here utterly self-centered, completely unable to see when I was wrong, completely unable to think of anybody but myself. And my sponsor, using the Step 10 2x4, sort of got me turned in the right direction. And, you know, I live a different life now. I am a credit to my parents. When I was dealing with the mother-in-law, Lord have mercy, my mother would say to me, "You make me so proud." I never thought that would happen. I know what's in my bank account. There's no questions. I don't have to take money from my husband or my work or any of the, you know, I can live free and clear in the world without any kind of conflict other than what I come up with in my own head. I still do have arguments with people who aren't there, but they're much less frequent. And a lot of times when I catch myself doing that, I say, whoop, let's be here now. Where are my shoes? Okay, I'll be here. Let's live on this planet. Life is a lot better. It's 1,000 times better, and the reason it's better is because of Alcoholics Anonymous. I love this program. I know that I gave a little lecture earlier about problems other than alcoholism, but you know, I want this program to be here for my grandchildren, and possibly my stepson. But you know, and my cousin's kids, and you know, their kids, and all of us. You know, we need to be here for the next generations coming up to save their lives just like ours were saved. I don't have a flashy ending. You know, I love AA. I have a higher power. I have a fabulous relationship with all of my family. I have a husband who loves me, who, I just have to tell this story real quick. When we were first dating, his first wife is an alcoholic. She's sober now. And, but she wasn't then, and he said to me, you know, I told him that I was in AA, and he was like, well, what do I do if you drink? I said, oh my God, change the locks. That's his plan still to this day. If I come home drunk, he's changing the locks. And I know that, and I don't blame him. You know, that would be my advice to anyone. So, you know, I'm so glad that doesn't have to happen to me. At least tonight, I'm probably going to stay sober for the rest of the night, and I'm glad to be here. Thanks.